Chapter 10 is going to go over motivating employees. In today's climate where companies are desperate to recruit and retain employees, it's important for a company to hire and motivate employees to ensure satisfaction with their job while working towards a common goal with the company, which is not only to provide a service to the community stakeholders, but also to make a profit. There are 8 learning objectives with Chapter 10. The first is to explain Taylor's theory of scientific management. Second, describe the Hawthorne studies and their significance to management. Third, identify the level of Maslow's theory of needs and apply them to employee motivation. 4, distinguish between the motivators and hygiene factors identified by Herzberg. 5, differentiate among theory X, Y, and Z. The 6th learning objective is to explain the key principles of goal setting, expectancy, reinforcement, and equity theories. 7, show how managers put motivation theories into action through such strategies as job enrichment, open communication, and job recognition. And finally, learning objective 8, show how managers personalize motivation strategies to appeal to employees across the globe and across generations. Let's start off the chapter with a little bit of trivia and name that company. Recognition is important to most employees. This company introduced an oddly named yet prestigious honor. The award was created when a company employee solved a problem and the manager grabbed a banana from his lunch. This was the very first Golden Banana Award. Were you able to think of the company that came up with this prestigious honor? If you said Hewlett-Packard, you're correct. This is just an example of how, even though it might sound silly by giving a banana for, an award, it's funny. It gains recognition. It lets people know that you appreciate them. As silly as it is also something that can grow into something bigger. We do a lot of different awards at the company I work for. We have what's called a Rising Star Award. So that's typically somebody that's new to the company that has a great sense of humor and really makes an impact on employees, both old and new, within the company. And it's was initially made in honor of an employee that passed, but has quickly gained a lot of popularity because people have so much fun with not just the nomination, but awarding the award. An intrinsic award is an internal reward that employees achieve from completing a task successfully. On the slide, can you tell which one is an intrinsic reward? If you guessed B, you're right. It's pride in your performance of completing a project or task. There's a lot of value with motivation, especially when a worker has job satisfaction. Happy workers can lead to happy customers, which leads to a successful business. When unhappy workers leave, the company usually loses more than an experienced employee. It can also lose the equivalent of 6 to 9 months of salary to cover the cost of recruiting and training replacements. And 6 to 9 months sounds low to me. I've also heard it's an annual salary of the person that left. Other costs of losing employees are even greater: loss of intellectual capital, decreased morale of the remaining workers, increased employee stress, increased employee gossip, decreased customer service, interrupted product development, and poor reputation. Engaged employees work with passion, feel a connection to their company, and are more productive. Many managers are focusing beyond employee engagement as they realize the importance of facilitating a positive employee experience. What motivates people within a company to do the best job they can for them? There's 2 different types of motivation. One's called an intrinsic reward and one is an extrinsic reward. The intrinsic means from within or inside. It's the personal satisfaction you feel when you complete a task or a goal. It's really just your pride in your performance and sense of achievement. I can remember when my son was in his early teenage years, and he would sleep a lot or sleep in really late and then get up and not really do a whole lot, not necessarily around the house, but just in general. And he was grumpy. And I would remind him, you need to get up, you need to be productive, have something to do to make you feel proud of yourself. And it's not necessarily making money or doing things for others. It's really just doing things for yourself, like taking a run because he liked to run. And when he was, in that lazy stage, he wasn't running. And when I saw him being more productive in his life, you could tell that it motivated him to do other things that made him feel good about himself. Extrinsic rewards, it's really something that's giving to you from someone externally or from the outside for recognition of good work. This can be in the form of pay raises, praise, and promotions. Motivating the right people to join the organization and stay is key to the function of managers. The Principles of Scientific Management was written by U.S. efficiency engineer Frederick Taylor and published in 1911, earning Taylor the title of Father of Scientific Management. Taylor's goal was to increase worker productivity to benefit both the firm and the worker. The solution, he thought, was to scientifically study the most efficient ways of doing things, or determining the single best way to perform each task, and then teach others those same methods. This approach became known as a scientific management. The three elements were basic, time, methods, and rules of work. Taylor's 4 key principles. Taylor was looking for the most efficient way or the one right way to do something. Workers were, in a sense, thought of as machines that could be fine-tuned. The 4 principles are: study how a job is performed, gather time and motion information, and check the different methods. Codify the best method into rules, choose workers whose skills match the rules, and then establish a fair level of performance and pay to get the job done. Time motion studies were done by Frederick Taylor to determine what was needed to complete each job and assess the time needed for each task. The goal was to determine the efficiencies that eventually became the standard for setting goals for a job. Later, Frank and Lillian Guibreth developed the principle of motion economy, which was a theory that every job can be broken down into a series of elementary motions, which was reviewed by Taylor, where the approach of scientific management viewed people to be like machines and needed to be properly programmed. So think about if you were to work in a fast food industry, if you worked at the register taking orders, there's certain steps. First step is welcoming the customer. Second is taking the orders from the customer that may potentially take a couple minutes at most, and then another few minutes to gather the order and give it to the customer. Another way of looking at it is when I was in high school, I used to work at Burger King. The idea was to take the order and serve the customer within 3 minutes. So the order may take approximately 20-30 seconds, which leaves another 2.5 minutes to gather the order, take the customer's money, and send them, through away from the line. Each one of these orders in the drive-through line were timed. There was an actual timer that sent this information to the corporate office so they could assess how timely we were serving our customers. This slide is another example of principle of motions. On the slide, it tells you how UPS tells their drivers how to get out of their truck, how fast to walk, how many packages to pick up, and deliveries per day, and even how to hold their keys, which is a little bit crazy. But can you see how the UPS follows that scientific management principles by teaching people the best way to perform each task? I know as an employee, when I'm given a new task, one of the things I always ask is what's the standard, excuse me, for completing this task? Because if there is already a proven standard that works, why create the wheel? Unless you find inefficiencies with that standard. There are many ways to help deal with stress. Sometimes it's just your network of coworkers, family, and friends that can offer support. Some people find that exercise helps with stress, as well as certain foods help you feel better in order to deal with stress. Focus on positive thinking, looking for the positive in the situation versus thinking more of the negative that could cause additional stress. Plan for regular breaks. Having small breaks instead of being stuck at your computer and working on different tasks can sometimes make it less stressful and also make you more productive. Try to develop a consistent sleep schedule. I know for some people, the more consistent the sleep schedule, the better their day goes. Other people don't necessarily depend on that consistency. And then finally, prioritize tasks. Know that for me, when I go into the office, I know there's 10 different things I need to get done, but if I prioritize the most important things, and sometimes I feel better just by being able to mark off 2 or 3 things on my to-do list during the day, making sure that the high priority task comes first. The Hawthorne studies were conducted in Cicero, Illinois at the Western Electric plant over a 6-year period. The studies were to look at how efficient workers were under different level of light. Mayo and Hawthorne found that productivity increased regardless of the light condition, which was a result of both a human and psychological factor. This resulted in what was called the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is the tendency for people to act differently when they know they're being studied. Psychologist Abraham Maslow believes that to understand motivation at work, we must understand human motivation in general. It seemed to him that motivation arises from need. That is, people are motivated to satisfy unmet needs. Needs that have already been satisfied no longer provide motivation for people. The hierarchy of needs are levels of psychological needs, safety needs, social needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization needs. When one need is satisfied, another higher level need emerges and motivates us to satisfy it. This slide reproduces the illustration of Maslow's hierarchy from the chapter. Figure 10.1 is also on page 250 in the textbook. If you've taken a basic psychology class, you're probably already familiar with Maslow and the premise of human needs hierarchy. But if you're not, let's take a look at some theory versus work environment needs of an employee and see if we can place them on the pyramid of needs. So first, let's think about how workers require competitive salaries, benefits, and a clean work environment. So on the pyramid of needs, that would come under physiological. Employees have the need for security against termination in their jobs and the feeling of being safe against bodily harm while performing their job function. That would be a safety need. On the job, workers have the need to feel a part of a successful group driven by achievement. That would fit in the social needs. An employee being recognized and acknowledged from peers that allows a person to feel important or needed. That would fall under esteem needs. And finally, employees seek opportunities for advancement, empowerment, recognition, and responsibility through additional work-related performance. companies must attempt to satisfy the needs through opportunities within the organization. So some of this would be under the self-actualization needs. Frederick Herzberg conducted a research study in the mid-1960s. Herzberg asked workers to rank various job-related factors in order of importance related to motivation. The question was, what creates enthusiasm for workers and makes them work to their full potential? The most important factors were sense of achievement, earned recognition, interest in the work itself, opportunity for growth, possibility for advancement, importance of responsibility, peer group relationships, pay, supervisor fairness, company policies and rules, status, job security, supervisor's friendliness, and working conditions. Factors receiving the most votes all focused on job content. Workers like to feel as if they contribute to the company. They want to earn recognition and feel their jobs are important. They want responsibility and to earn recognition for that responsibility by having a chance for growth and advancement. And of course, workers also like their job to be interesting. Workers did not consider factors related to job environment to be motivators. Workers felt the absence of good pay, job security, and friendly supervisors could cause dissatisfaction as well, but their presence did not motivate employees to work harder. It just provided a satisfaction contentment. So with this, would you work harder if you were paid more? Some people say yes, some people say no. My theory is if a person is not content with the job that they have, money is typically a temporary band-aid on the situation. So if somebody starts to leave because they got another job with a better title and had more responsibility, the old company might offer them more money to stay, which can sound appealing, but it doesn't take long for an employee to be unsatisfied with the work again and then go out seeking another opportunity. Herzberg concluded that there were certain factors or motivators that made employees productive and gave them satisfaction. These factors you have seen mostly related to job content. Herzberg called other elements job hygiene factors or maintenance factors. These related to the job environment and could cause dissatisfaction if missing, but wouldn't necessarily motivate an employee if increased. The next slide will go into some more details on the motivators and hygiene factors. As we talked about in the last slide on Herzberg's motivators and hygiene factors, motivators are work itself, achievement, recognition, responsibility, and growth and advancement. The maintenance or the hygiene factors can cause dissatisfaction, but changing them doesn't normally change the motivational effect. So it would be company policy administration, supervision, working conditions, interpersonal relations, salary, status, and job security. This slide gives a good starting point to see the relationship between Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Herzberg's theory of factors. Think about what we talked about in a couple slides back about motivators. Is money a good motivator? For me, as I discussed earlier, I think it's typically just a temporary band-aid. If somebody's really unhappy, they're going to leave the company one way or another. It really, by giving more money, just kind of delays the obvious. But feel free to look at this slide and the comparison. You can also see this on page 251 in your text. There are simple ways to increase employees' drive and reinvigorate work life. So one of the things that I do, I get bored easy. So taking on new challenges and learning new things is important for me to stay interested in my job. One thing that means a lot to some, not necessarily to me, is redecorating your office or your cubicle. Sometimes just a little change of scenery makes, life a little easier when you go to work, being there 8 hours, 10 hours a day. And then is complaining. For me, I'm the typical person. I go in and do my job. I try not to complain, but I also try to make sure that my boss or the other people in power know some of the things that go on that make work more efficient. So instead of complaining, I might highlight how certain efficiencies helped one process. Could we look at other ways to improve another process? And then helping others advance their careers. Um, in some work environments, it's a dog eat dog world. It's very competitive, but you'll find as not only you help others to succeed in their careers, it also helps you. Not only just from the recognition of helping others, but you also, as you get to know other people and the things that they do in their jobs, you might come away with learning a few things of your own. So for instance, I am a mentor for a couple people at the company that I work for. And a lot of times when my mentee is telling me situations that they're dealing with within their department, I'll make suggestions on ways that, things might improve for that person. And as we're discussing, how these suggestions might work, that my mentee might talk about some other ways that they've tried to help this person, which might work well for somebody in my department. So it's really important to make sure that not only do you help other people advance careers, you take what you learn from them and apply it where you can within your own job. Let's review. What are the similarities and differences between Taylor's time motion studies and Mayo's Hawthorne studies? Frederick Taylor's time motion studies measured output. Taylor inspired the Hawthorne studies. Originally, Elton Mayo wanted to determine the optimal level of lighting necessary to increase productivity on the factory floor, which is a type of scientific management. He later determined that people who were empowered worked harder. Ultimately, Mayo's study brought about behavioral change. How did Mayo's findings influence scientific management? The findings at Hawthorne plant in Cicero, Illinois completely changed how people thought about employees and motivation. One finding was that money was not the primary motivator. These new assumptions led to many theories about human side of motivation. Next, you can also draw a diagram of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and label and describe the parts. So you can see that on a few slides back. And finally, on the review, explain the distinction between what Herzberg called motivators and hygiene factors. As Herzberg studied the results of his research study, he concluded that motivators made employees productive and gave them satisfaction. These factors related to job content. Hygiene factors are related to job environment and could, if left unintended, cause employees dissatisfaction but would not provide long-term motivation. Hygiene factors include things such as pay and working conditions. McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Douglas McGregor observed that managers' attitudes generally fall into one of the two different sets of managerial assumptions. McGregor called them Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X suggests that employees dislike work, avoid responsibility, have little ambition, and are motivated by threat and fear. Theory Y argues that people like work, seek responsibility, and are motivated by empowerment. If a manager believes Theory X or Theory Y, he or she would tend to treat employees accordingly. In Theory X, the assumptions for management are the average person dislikes work and will avoid it if possible. Because of this dislike, workers must be forced, controlled, directed, and threatened with punishment to make them put forth the effort to achieve the organizational goals. The average worker prefers to be directed, which is to avoid responsibility, has relatively little ambition, and wants security. And then finally, primary motivators are fear and punishment. In theory Y, it makes a different assumption about people. Most people like work. It's unnatural as play or rest. Most people naturally work towards goals to which they are committed. The depth of a person's commitment to goals depends on the perceived rewards for achieving them. Under certain conditions, most people not only accept but also will seek responsibility. People are capable of using a relatively high degree of imagination, creativity, and cleverness to solve problems. In industry, the average person's intellectual potential is only partially realized. People are motivated by a variety of rewards. Each worker is stimulated by a reward unique to him or her, like time off, money, recognition, and in today's climate, having the ability to work from home, that kind of flexibility goes a long way. This slide represents Theory X managers. Basically, these managers don't live to make their employees happy. So in the example, Charlie Ergen, he's the co-founder, chair of Dish Network. He makes his employees work long hours and a lot of mandatory overtime and few paid holidays. Employees describe the culture as condescension and distrust, yet their earnings are consistently high and beat market expectations. So as an employee, would you rather work for a Theory X manager or a Theory Y manager? For empowerment to be a real motivator, management should follow 3 steps. Find out what people think the problems are in the organization. Let them design solutions and get out of the way and let them put those solutions into action. So let them be creative and come up with the ideas. If they don't work, you can always go back to the drawing board and come up with additional solutions based on the feedback from their original ideas. Alchi's theory of Z. William Alchi was a researcher that looked at the cultural differences between the US and Japan. What he found, as the US, the employers are more focused on the individual, to where in Japan, they're more committed to the organization and the group in general. Theory Z is the hybrid approach of types A and J. Demographic changes, the worst recession in their country's history, and fierce global competition forced Japanese managers to reevaluate the way they conduct business. The effects of 2011 earthquake on Japanese businesses reinforced the need to change, which is why William Alchi did this research on the cultural differences. From this slide, that can also be found on page 254 of your text, you can see how Alchi recommended a hybrid approach called that Theory Z after comparing the management approaches between the US and the Japanese. As you can see, the hybrid is in the middle in the green section that basically makes them feel their management approaches should be to offering long-term employment, collective decision-making, individual responsibility, slow evaluation and promotion. One of those, that doesn't necessarily seem right, maybe to some employees, but if you give them too much promotion too quickly, at some point somebody's going to top out of their job. So it makes sense not to promote people rather quickly. That's unless obviously it's warranted, but most of the time quick promotions are not. Next would be implicit informal control with explicit formal control. Also moderately specialized career paths. So for me, in the finance and accounting, the career path might be, say you start in accounts payable and receivable and eventually move up into working with general ledger. And then, of course, there's management positions and so on within the finance and accounting offices. And finally, holistic concerns for employees, which include their family. This is a continuation of the previous slide that really just lists the different theories of X, Y, and Z. But it was also already illustrated on the previous slide. So if you want to learn more about that, you can either go to your text and look at it a little bit more detailed, which is on page 255. This slide is an example of how companies might use Theory Z to manage their employees. So Google employees get a lot of perks. They get state-of-the-art gyms to free meals to energy pods. The energy pods, the idea is to harness relaxation. And that gives employees refreshing naps at any time of the day. Can you think of other examples that might give some kind of a holistic concern for employees by that were suggested by William Alge and his style of management? For me, some of the things I can think of that my company offers, like this slide says, it offers free gym memberships, free meals, employee of the month recognitions. They also do things like spotlighting employees, makes them, which this might be more of hierarchy of needs, but also makes them feel a part of the group and recognized. They also offer things like if you refer a certain amount of employees, your name might go into a drawing and you could win anything between as low as like a company t-shirt as high as a vacation voucher where you can go anywhere in the world with hotel and airfare. That's just some of the things that my company offers. Goal setting theory says setting ambitious but attainable goals can motivate workers and improve performance if the goals are accepted and accompanied by feedback and if conditions in the organization pave the way for achievement. All organization members should have some basic agreement about overall goals and specific objectives for each department and each individual. In order to meet the needs of the employees, as we discussed on the last slide, there should be a system to engage everyone in the organization in goal setting and implementation. Peter Drucker developed such a system in the 1960s. Managers cannot motivate people, they can only thwart people's motivation because people motivate themselves, he said. Called Management by Objectives, or MBO, Drucker's system of goal setting and implementation includes a cycle of discussion, review, and evaluation of objectives among top and middle managers, supervisors, and employees. This slide is a great diagram of the management by objectives, or the MBO. And again, this was popular back in the 1950s and created by Peter Drucker. Can you think about what the benefits of an MBO is to employees? For me, it can improve performance. It can have an employee understand a greater sense of identification within the company. It may also maximize utilization of human resources with no role ambiguity. Improved communications, improved organizational structure, and then device for organizational control. Can you think of anything in particular that a benefit of MBO might apply to a job that you may have had? According to Victor Vroom's expectancy theory, employee expectations can affect motivation. That is, the amount of effort employees exert on a specific task depends on their expectation of the outcome. Vroom contends that employees ask 3 questions before committing their maximum effort to a task. Can I accomplish the task? If I do accomplish, what's my reward? Is the reward worth it? So for me, the way I think of the expectancy theory affects me personally is I wanted to be promoted to a director level position at the company that I work for. So I met with my boss to talk about my aspirations with the company, and he said, you know, I've really thought about this actually in the past, and the things that I want to see you accomplish in order to get this promotion are to complete new responsibilities with tasks Y and Z, just not to go into a lot of detail. So what I had to think through is this something that I can accomplish without any interactions from my boss, or is this something that I'm going to need guidance on? Um, After I finish all these tasks, which there were 5, what's my reward going to be? So potentially I'm going to get a promotion to a director level position and potentially a raise. So when we think about the reward being worth the effort, it really depends on what your expectations are for the new position and what the salary expectations are. So again, really these expectations will vary from person to person because some people have different ideas of whether the reward is really worth the effort. Here's another table that's also located in page 256 of your text. It really just goes over the expectancy theory. One, on the task, can you accomplish the task? If yes, you go forward and think about the outcome, which is the reward, and was it the reward going to be worth it? If yes, the employee is likely to be motivated. If you start back on the task and if you answer no, the employee is not likely to get motivated. But if they answer yes and move on to the outcome, but then realize that the reward isn't worth it, then they might not be motivated either. So just think about, how this might affect your everyday life, or even if you do have a job, how certain motivators might help you be more successful within your company. Moving forward with the expectancy theory, let's talk about other researchers, David Nadler and Edward Lawler, how they modified Vroom's theory and suggested that managers follow 5 steps to improve employee performance. So instead of just the 3 steps, we have 5 now. The first one is determine what rewards employees value, determine each employee's desired performance standard, ensure that performance standards are attainable, and guarantee rewards tied to that performance. And finally, be certain that employees consider the rewards to be adequate. Equity theory looks at how employees' perceptions of fairness affect their willingness to perform. It assumes employees ask, if I do a good job, will it be worth it? And what's fair? Employees try to maintain equity between what they put into the job and what they get out of it, comparing those inputs and outputs to those of others in similar position. Workers find comparative information through personal relationship, professional organizations, and other sources. When workers perceive inequity, they will try to reestablish fairness in a number of ways. For example, think about in college classes, you compare your grade that you earned on a term paper with your classmate's grade. If you received a lower grade than somebody else that put the same amount of effort in, you might reduce your effort in the class for future assignments. Or you might rationalize the difference by saying grades are overvalued anyway. Let's review. Briefly describe the managerial attitudes behind theories X, Y, and Z. Douglas McGregor developed theories X and Y after observing the manager's attitudes fall into one of the 2 different categories of assumptions. Theory X assumes the following. People dislike work and will avoid work. Workers must be forced, controlled, directed, or even threatened with punishment to make them work towards an organization's goals. The average worker prefers to be directed, wishes to avoid responsibility, has little ambition, and wants security and primary motivators of fear and money. Theory Y managers have completely different views on managing people. Theory Y managers believe most people like to work. The depth of a person's commitment to goals depends on the perceived rewards for achieving them. Under certain circumstances, people will seek responsibility. Employees tend to be imaginative, creative, and clever, and employees are motivated by a variety of rewards. Finally, Theory Z was developed by William Alchi of UCLA and his blending of an American management style Theory A with Japanese management style Theory J into Theory Z. The next item to review is explain goal setting theories. The idea behind goal setting theories is the process of setting attainable goals to motivate employees and improve performance. The key to goal setting theory is that the goals must be accepted and accompanied by feedback to truly be effective. Next, evaluate expectancy theory. When could expectancy theory apply to your efforts or lack of efforts? Victor Vroom created the expectancy theory. His central premise was the amount of effort employees exert on a specific task depends on the expectations of the outcome. He contends that employees will ask 3 specific questions before committing maximum effort. Can I complete a task? If I do accomplish it, what's my reward? Is the reward worth the effort? Like goal setting theory, the key to expectancy theory is setting attainable goals. If the goal is not attainable, employees will simply give up, thus reducing motivation. Finally, explain the principle of equity theory. Equity theory looks at how employees' perceptions of fairness affect their willingness to perform. Employees will try to balance or maintain equity between what they put into the job and what they get out of it, comparing those inputs and outputs to those of other similar positions. Herzberg argued factors such as responsibility, achievement, and recognition were more important than motivational factors in the long run than pay. He believed that if you wanted to motivate employees, you should focus on enriching the job. Those who advocate job enrichment believe that 5 characteristics of work are important in motivation and performance. The 5 characteristics are skill variety, which is the extent to which a job demands different skills. Task identity, the degree to which the job requires doing a task with a physical outcome from beginning to end. 3, task significance, the degree to which the job has a substantial impact on the lives or work of others in the company. 4, autonomy, the degree of freedom or independence and discretion in scheduling work and determining procedures. And finally, feedback, which is the amount of direct and clear information given about job performance. One type of job enrichment is job enlargement, which combines a series of tasks into one challenging and interesting assignment. Job rotation also makes work more interesting and motivating by moving employees from one job to another. One problem, of course, is the need to train employees to do several different operations. However, the result to increase motivation and the value of having flexible cross-trained employees usually offsets costs. In order to put the theory into action, motivating through open communication means creating a culture that rewards listening, training managers to listen, use effective questioning techniques, removing barriers to open communications, and avoid vague, ambiguous communication, making it easy to communicate. Ask employees what's important to them. And you'll come to find out the more you solicit this kind of information, the more open your employees will be to you. When applying open communication to your self-managed teams, you have to be able to respect your workers by providing them with interesting work, developing new skills, allowing autonomy or the ability to work on someone's own without questioning or micromanaging, decentralizing authority, so giving that group the empowerment to make some decisions on their own, and reward good work. So moving forward again with putting that theory into action is recognition for a job well done is really important. And it's more important to some than others, but sometimes it's more important than just the raise. Sometimes what's important is that recognition of a job well done might lead to advancement opportunities. So for me, an advancement opportunity was that recognition as well as additional pay for a job well done. Some other things that might be included for recognition of good work is additional work that's challenging. I know we've got an accountant that has been out of college for a couple of years now, and I remember him telling me that, he was always the smartest in his class. Work was always really easy. And then when he got assigned to us a project where we were looking at potentially opening up a lab, he said it was some of the hardest work and the best challenge he had ever had, which motivated him to do other challenging work and to go above and beyond because he was recognized for the work that he did on that project. And then also noticing positive actions out loud. Also, some of the recognition might be additional paid time off. So the company I work for has been recognized not just within the Cincinnati region, but within the country nationally for being one of the best places to work. So oftentimes when we get this kind of recognition, the owner of the company might give the employees an extra day off or an extra 2 days off. Another way for recognition is giving a prime parking spot. What seems to be small really makes a big difference because it makes that employee feel like they're recognized. More recognition might be flexible schedules, additional vacation, and the big one for me would be that small equity stake or stock options in the company that might give the employee that feeling of being secure financially. This is kind of a funny slide. So it's an alternative reward. Instead of getting, the certificates or plaques for Employee of the Month or having a good idea, Hewlett Packard awards a golden banana to show its appreciation for exceptional employees, which is really kind of cute. I think I also remember, if you've ever watched the Twilight movies, one of the teachers had a golden onion that he gave to students as a reward for, a good answer or solving a problem. So it's just funny, and it's a good item to have in your office to have a discussion about as well. There's lots of tools that a company can use to see how their employees are engaging. One of them is AI or artificial intelligence that allows, I don't think managers use this too often, but I hear about how HR departments are able to manage or monitor moods, discover what employees really want and what's important in the workplace. It can also monitor employee manager interaction, evaluating their conversations, and it's helping increase employee engagement. I think also AI can also see if a person is surfing, looking at jobs. Maybe they're on LinkedIn a lot looking for job opportunities, which might give HR an indicator that, oh, we need to engage this employee and see what we can do to keep them. AI really gives the managers the opportunity to remedy a problem or increase the employee's role before you lose them. And think about how much it's not about just losing the employee, it's the cost of replacing them. It's not necessarily the salary, it's the amount it costs to train those employees. So if you can retain employees by offering them ways to engage better, like a new job, a new project, it's going to be in your best interest as a company and save you a lot of money too. And then also on the flip side is really give an employee a feeling of satisfaction with working with the company. In a globalized world, managers must recognize that what is appropriate for one culture might not work in another. Cultural differences make worker motivation a challenging task for global managers. You have high context cultures that require relationships and group trust before performance. But then you also have low context cultures that believe in relationship building distracts from tasks. Leaders really need to be aware and culturally astute, flexible, and able to deal with ambiguity. With any company, the state of the economy is cyclical, so you're going to have good times and bad. But sometimes you have to learn to work on a budget when you are in times of a bad economy or even during a good economy. So we need to think of tactics that HR managers might use to motivate people. So the four on the screen are those motivators on a budget. So it's really bringing employees in on the company's overall vision. So that way they can somehow align their goals to work with the vision of the company. Communicate often and effectively, and acknowledge and celebrate all team milestones, no matter how big or small. And then also be flexible with scheduling. So something that our company does is we try to be as flexible as possible with the amount of people out there that are willing to work or even have the specialty in the industry that we work in. So a lot of times we do have a work from home policy where people get to work 2 days from home, 3 days in the office. But oftentimes we're flexible with that. So if people need to work a whole week from home every once in a while, it's not a big deal. So just think about ways for motivating on a budget. So when you are in a position to where you might have some flexibility to get some additional work-life balance, that could be a good way to achieve it. Managers must consider cultural differences, and they must also contend with employees in different age groups. What issues might you encounter if you were a manager of employees of various generations, like the baby boomers, Generation X or Y? The main constant in the lives of Gen Xers and millennials is inconsistency. Consider the unprecedented changes in the past 10 to 20 years in every area of economic, technological, scientific, social, and political atmospheres. Gen Xers and millennials expect change. It is the absence of change that they find questionable. This slide just goes on to give the different generations from 95 through 2010. We talked a little bit about it in the previous slide, but really just gives, the Gen Z timeline as well as what they grew up around. So they grew up after the 9/11 attack on the United States in the wake of the Great Recession, where there were a lot of school violence. And the main constant in life was inconsistency, unfortunately. And then we have the Generation Alpha, which that's a new one for me, for anyone born over or past 2010. All right, let's talk about Gen X in the workplace. I'm a Gen Xer. Gen Xers really desire that economic security, but focus a lot on their career security than job security. Good motivators for managers are an emphasis on results rather than hours. Managers should be flexible and good at collaborating and consensus building. And for Gen X, what's very effective is giving feedback and praise for a good job. Let's talk about millennials in the workplace. They tend to be a little impatient, skeptical, blunt, and expressive within the workplace. They're typically tech savvy and grasp onto new concepts quicker than somebody of an older generation. They're able to be multitaskers and be very efficient at it as well. They're a little more tolerant and they place a high value on work-life balances. They're stimulated by fun, as one of the key job requirements. And they tend to job search due to the state of the economy. And it's not even just the state of the economy is for a millennial, by job searching, they're bouncing job to job, but they're also a lot of times promoting up and receiving higher pay, which gets them there quicker to where they want to be as far in their career. It's important for managers when working among different generations to make sure they're able to communicate differently with different ages. What might be effective with a millennial isn't necessarily effective with a Gen Z or a Gen X. As we talked about in the last slide, millennials are skeptical and outspoken. They're image driven as well as adaptable and tech savvy. Let's talk about the Gen Zers in the workplace. Gen Z typically is a little more cautious and security minded. They're inspired to improve the world, are resilient and pragmatic, they're tech savvy, and they want to be a part of the community within their workplace. And they place a high emphasis on practical benefits such as healthcare. So as we've talked in several different slides, working with different generations, it's important to recognize how communicating one way with one generation may not work with another generation. So for instance, baby boomers, they prefer meetings and conference calls, to where Gen Xers prefer emails or will choose meetings only if there's no other option. For me, as a Gen Xer, there's nothing worse than sitting in a meeting for an hour and nothing gets figured out. Millennials, they prefer to use technology to communicate, particularly social media. And finally, the Gen Zers prefer that face-to-face meeting and shy away from phone calls. Let's review. What are several steps firms can take to increase internal communications and thus motivation? To increase communication, managers can reward listening across the organization, train supervisors and managers to listen using effective questioning techniques, remove barriers to communication, avoid vague and ambiguous communication, make it easy to communicate, and ask employees what's important to them. Focusing on communication is important, but managers can also focus on job enrichment, such as skill variety and task significance. What problems may emerge when firms try to implement participative management? Participative management, if implemented properly, can be successful, but like everything in life, there are benefits and weaknesses to this type of management style. One problem with this approach is that it's difficult to implement, and workers may spend more time formulating suggestions than actually solving a problem. And finally, in the review, why is it important to adjust motivational styles to individual employees? Are there any general principles of motivation that today's managers should follow? In today's multicultural workplace, managers cannot use one motivational formula for all. While they must adjust motivational styles, it's essential that manager gives all employees the keys to do a good job, the tools, the right information, and the right amount of cooperation. Motivating employees across cultures and generations can be simple if managers acknowledge a job well done.